All right, 1 second.
Oh, sorry, I hadn't started my ballot yet, or I would have seen what side you all were.
You're okay. Lisa.
Is everyone ready? Can I get a thumbs up when everyone's ready? Awesome. Cool. Well, let's get started. Okay. So first off is inherency. Trump will not increase immigration from China, Boeing 2020. The biggest hurdle to making any of this happen is probably the administration's generally anti-immigrant views. Thus the plan. The United States Congress will pass a bill signed by the president that removes caps on Chinese immigration across immigration visas EB1, 2, and 3, and family visas, and that allows refugees, and removes the restriction on country limit for immigration visas. Now on the solvency. One, open immigration weakens China's ability to project power and develop dangerous tech. NARA State 2020. This represents a golden opportunity to drain the best minds from China. Every Chinese national with a college degree should be able to get a green card without a numerical cap. All the U.S. government has to do to wipe out the Chinese government's talent recruitment efforts and raise the percentage even more is allow them to come study, work, and live here with the minimum bureaucratic fuss and the removal of arbitrary visa restrictions. Next, we have an ethical obligation to accept Chinese refugees, and it will strengthen our ability to win world opinion. Some in 2020. China has detained some 1 million Uyghur in concentration camps. The wave of repression in recent years has also impacted the dominant ethnic group who question policy. These and other victims of Chinese immigrant repression deserve refuge. We can be the nation that even the populations of our adversaries can join. That's a much better image than being the nation that closes its doors. It has a much better chance of effectively countering China in any geopolitical competition and winning world opinion. Next. Immigration is critical for a peaceful constraint of China. Nye 2020. We could fail. A misguided strategy like Trump's could lead us to discard our aces of alliances or to restrict immigration. You pointed to America's ability to draw on the talents of the entire world. That is not possible with China's ethnic nationalism. Our strategy toward China should aim to avoid either a hot or cold war while cooperating when possible and competing when necessary. Our strategic objective should be to shape China's behavior by strengthening our alliances. Now onto the Chinese violence advantage. China is a genocidal state, flouting international norms and generating new diseases. Allowing immigrants is key to change its behavior. Sullivan 2020. There's no doubt China is a genocidal state. The regime is determined to coerce, kill, re-educate, and segregate its Muslim population. This is pure racial social engineering. This genocidal dictatorship also took this past week to stomp all over whatever's left of freedom in Hong Kong. This genocidal dictatorship has also presided over the emergence of a terrifying virus that many scientists believe crossed over to humans in China's wet markets, which still won't close. The country is now home to yet another swine flu virus, which has serious potential to cause a mass outbreak among humans. China is also harassing his neighbors with military aggression. It's time we treated China as the dictatorship it is. Granting asylum to all Hong Kongers would be a start. The weaknesses of the Trump years need to end. Trump's failure to act is preventing global action to constrain China and stop genocide. Wilhelm 2020. International condemnation of China's abuses is widespread, providing a basis for a coordinated global response. It is one issue on a laundry list of grievances. Trump represents a significant hurdle to punitive global action. Trump's indifference toward human rights issues is well documented. Now on to AI. Immigration is key to maintain U.S. AI lead over China. How 2019. The report analyzed the authorship of papers and found a nearly tenfold increase in the number of authors who did their undergraduate studies in China. Despite the country's success in cultivating domestic talent, it has struggled with retention. Roughly 3/4 of the Chinese authors in the study currently work outside China, and 85% of those work in the U.S. It's the main among the 4 major inputs into a country's AI ecosystem: talent, data, capital, and hardware. The first has the greatest impact. It's the main driver of innovation in algorithms and hardware. Next is Wang 2019. Washington's anti-immigration policies would allow Beijing to catch up by building a strong talent pool, the top investors said. Trump's administration may use the trade war to stall Chinese tech. It would not stop China from hiring the best talent in the field. Next, if the U.S. falls behind on AI, it will remove all safety standards, resulting in destruction. Johnson, 2018. It seems that China, like Russia, has relatively few moral, legal, or ethical qualms in deploying lethal autonomous weapons. The U.S. will likely be much more constrained in the development of these technologies. The Pentagon's reticence to incorporate AI into existing weaponry is grounded in liberal democratic norms to avoid what the Pentagon has called Terminator conundrum and the aggressive pursuit of these capabilities by rival powers. The U.S.'s current commitment to keeping humans in charge could waver. If the present trajectory holds, China will soon challenge the U.S.'s lead in several emerging military strategic fields. That is likely to accelerate the Pentagon's efforts to innovate, offsetting and make it harder to keep this disruptive high-tech arms race in check. Lastly is Taiwan. Taiwan flashpoint risks war. Trump must show resolve. Haydarian 2020. China's swift implementation of a draconian security law in Hong Kong has raised the prospect that Taiwan could be next. Analysts now wonder whether Beijing may consider a muscular approach to reincorporating Taiwan. With rising tensions in the Taiwan Straits, America's commitment to Taiwan security will be crucial in the months ahead, but there are concerns over Trump's resolve. The next few months are key. That's Grease and Wang's 2019. China could well move to take Taiwan. The 2020 US presidential election looms in the mind of Chinese nationals. Trump is seen as isolationist. A Trump successor may not be so willing to cut a deal. The idea that China can force reunification without fighting is delusional. Things can get out of control fast. And lastly, Taiwan is the most likely nuclear flashpoint. If China moves against Taiwan, the US is obligated to intervene. Talmadge 2018. Conventional forces can threaten nuclear forces in ways that generate pressures to escalate. If US operations endangered China's nuclear forces, Chinese leaders might come to think that Washington had aims beyond winning the conventional war. Beijing might reluctantly conclude that limited nuclear escalation was a viable option. The most worrisome flashpoint for a US-Chinese war is Taiwan. The Taiwan Relations Act states that the US will consider any effort to determine the future of Taiwan by other than peaceful means. A grave concern. US conventional military operations would likely threaten or eliminate Chinese nuclear capabilities. And with that, I'm open for cross.
Sorry, I was muted. Okay, let's start off now. Okay, what are the current restrictions on refugees with like the United States and China? What current restrictions exist?
Well, I mean, it's just difficult for refugees to come.
Yeah, what kind of statutes are you removing on refugees?
I'm removing caps on immigration visas, EB1, 2, and 3, and family visas.
Yeah, but those are not refugees, correct? So is there a statute on refugees?
Well, I mean, there's no specific visa for refugees. Refugees are just like, refugees are defined as per the USFG, and there's a process for them to get in.
What's the cap on family visas?
I'm not sure. We just remove it though, so it doesn't matter.
Is there a number of family visas people can get?
I'm not sure.
Okay. 1 second. And let's go to the AI advantage first. What is like the impact of falling behind on AI? Like other than the US just falling behind, like what impact does that have?
Like destruction and potential war.
With who?
Just in general, like we just say that safety standards will fall, and they're like no, like China and Russia don't have any moral, legal, or ethical qualms with relations to AI.
Okay. And do you know the numbers of the EB visas that are getting restricted? Like,
what do you mean?
Like, I mean, what are the current restrictions?
I'm sorry, come again?
What are the current restrictions?
I mean, we're moving caps on like.
Yeah, but do you have any number of the restrictions?
No, I'm not sure what you mean by that. But
all right. And let's. And okay, can you tell me on the Chinese violence impact, how many people / what kind of people are facing the like genocidal impacts in China?
Genocidal impacts?
Like, I mean, who is getting killed by the Chinese government for doing what?
Uyghur people. My first card specifically says that. Like
and can those people like come in now at all, or are you just starting to allow them to come in now?
We're allowing them to come in now. They can't come in now, is our argument.
Okay. And let's see. Okay. That's all the questions I have. I'm starting to take prep now.
You're muted.
All right, is everyone ready? Cool. Let me start my timer first. 7 minutes. Starting. First topicality, legal immigration excludes refugees. Any interpretation legal immigration specifically excludes refugees out of 5. The 3 categories of the U.S. area, legal immigration, refugee relocation, undocumented immigration. Legal immigration refers to legal permanent residence as a different type of immigration status is granted to refugees. B is the violation. The plan removes restrictions on refugees. C is the standards. 1 limits. You should prefer the interpretation that limits the topic. The resolution used and limiting the scope of the resolution creates a fair balance that limits affirmative creativity with a manageable research burden. Limited topics includes classrooms, topics education. 2 is ground. Topics is partially unbounded. Predictable off-links and mechanisms are critical to net ground destroys equity and obscure resolutions. Fairness is key. And this at best is going to be extra topical because they're not going to get access to any of their advantages on human rights through this. On to the next step. On the voters, the NFA LD rules state that he's a voter too. Defaulting human interpretation, finding that my interpretation is better, they violate it. That's enough to vote on C. On to the next step. Immigration reform must be brought any interpretation. Immigration reform means no policy changes directly, specifically as nationality. Fair, no date. Immigration reform should immediately be adopted pending to comprehensive immigration reform. There should be no favoritism or discrimination against any person on the basis of nationality. B is the violation. F only is affecting immigrants from one nation. C is the standards. 1, predictability. The fair evidence has a fair predictability on this ground because by putting into context, why reform cannot be only on one country. Prefer predictable interpretation because they provide a stable net ground. 2 is ground. Picking countries specks out of the disadvantages and lets them say doing China resolve the link on this at this ground destroys competitive equity and asks for resolution for necessary education. Cross-apply to voters. Now, let's start from the horse trading this side. Onto the second one. Congressional division is stalling immigration policy. Now the GOP would only allow for immigration reform if border wall funding is included. Jill Van Hinchman 20. Uncertainty continues. Activists face a White House prioritized immigration restriction, but divided Congress Pelosi made it clear Democrats were done with their legislation. Had little interest in meeting for GOP demands for Trump's border wall meeting as any part of immigration overhaul. This isn't anybody that wants a straight for border wall for immigration. A border wall escalates and cements destruction and violence in Mexico and Central America. It's a deathscape. Washington 19. There's a real border crisis. A wall will only make it worse. Their children and local families will continue to be traumatized. Driving this is instability and violence against Central America and Mexico. There are crisis of 7,000 dead people across borders in the past 2 decades in charge parts of the southwest deathscape. This crisis is going to be verging in permanent. A wall will create unquantifiable human suffering. Stabilizing America's near abroad is key to U.S. grand strategy. Prevents Cold War with China from escalating to conflict. 18. Geopolitical rivals have always been sought to Mexico against the U.S. preventing Mexico from Central America from becoming allies of rival powers must be always a priority. The U.S. grand strategy of the U.S. immigration should also do so without insulting any neighbors. As two major great powers to the U.S. China have no choice but to work on peaceful coexistence. Extend is the realistic goal. Onto the Miller dissent. Control over immigration is Stephen Miller's current focus. Plan denies his ability to secure presidential victories and causes him to pivot aggressive foreign policy. Bills for 20. After the election, Miller wanted to say the most on immigration. His installation from Congress, Miller has two impulses. One is a bomb door, the other is to try to secure victories for the president. Miller's sort of official status. The new world order. You need to go on board. Miller will push for NATO Article 5 decommitment as his next available America First tool, make of 18. Promoting America's fellows, Miller shaped president's policy towards Europe by deleting material in his speech about NATO. Miller kept expressing commitment to Article 5 and Article 5 the court and reporters asked if the commitment was wavering in Miller place by removing material from speech. Miller helped to president and to advance about NATO. Article 5 commitment is key to NATO integrity. The alternative is a global conflict. Bernesky 18. The U.S. brought to Europe and the U.S. national security umbrella with the NATO treaty. Article 5 is the most important element to get an attack on all. An attack on all U.S. troops have been deployed in the region to ensure Canada cannot be dominated and these are local arms race. Grand strategy rests on credibility and its premise and Russian would bring modern line to an end. Now on to the solvency groups. You can group on this just solvency turn situation. Immigration reform on human rights rhetoric is inherently dehumanizing, legitimizes hierarchies of repression. Anchor 14. Any legal declaration of any statement of human rights constrained on a particular definition of feeling human paradox of human rights norms must be under the body entity whose anarchic desires must be mastered or disciplined by liberal reason. High human rights norms have been tended to martial and narrow normative exclusionary vision of the dignified human subject. Standards operate as benchmarks that say a subject of deserving of rights. Suggesting norms are compulsory but also legitimize hierarchies of repression. Don't give them any access to solvency based on the night. This evidence alliances are key to frustrating China, not specific immigration. The AF makes zero argument why the plan actually increases alliances. Onto the AI advantage. China will never catch the U.S. Economic factors and key factors are key facets of tech are better indicators than one. One for example, Shimon 20. Chinese technology aren't quite as strong as many as Americans believe, and neither are China's chances of surpassing the U.S. The U.S. advantages are overlooking and underappreciated. The U.S. also the upper end technology. China's semiconductor badly behind. The U.S. is better at developing those theories and chips power at the AI. The Chinese can't catch us. And this post states their evidence on China the China AI advantage. So you have to take this. And trade-off with Chinese talent is real. No one comes to the U.S. from China because they want to. They come because the Chinese government actually allows it. Current market 19. The Chinese are notorious for appealing to nationalism and loyalty over their citizens. The government has enormous power over citizens in China. Only the government can grant someone permission to leave the country. Work in the United States we seen the Chinese government use their power. And the only risk here is a link term. China is empirically proven to use U visas as a way to commit high-level technology espionage. They're doing this with some student visas in the school. Imagine what they would do with unlimited AB visas. Spending and rights 20. U.S. government approves dozens of visas each year. Major tech corporations typically employ these foreign nationals claiming that they can offer which some jobs to Americans. And one of the countrymen graduate student, and accused of stealing United States, stealing and staying in the United States, being spying, and was really providing information to a Chinese intelligence officer, the Chinese Communist Party, wanted him to obtain information, and as American citizens working on the military and aerospace projects. This is an easy battle in the neck. The app only risks that China catches and surpasses the U.S. and AI. On the Taiwan advantage, the first card says to resolve Trump's needs to show for Taiwan. There's zero why the plan actually represents military and resolve in or support of Taiwan. The former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, of former NATO commander, former CIA director, and Asia's all conclude that China is unlikely to attack Taiwan. The risks are way too high. Dempsey Service and Deuteronomy 20. These are Chinese opportunistic. I think they'll conclude their remain to point on the Taiwan issue. I would describe the less than 1 in 4 chance that there will be a military movement in the immediate future. China has more power and still is internationally from sanctions. On top of COVID, there will be plenty of international support for their economy. They will pay for a long time. You can cut the card there, and that's time.
I'm sorry, I had my timer set for 6 minutes. I apologize.
All right, I'm open for cross.
Okay.
Just to point out, I did not read the last cards on Taiwan. I only read the first card on Taiwan.
Okay, you only read the first Taiwan card?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I want to start with your horse. Can you summarize the story of the horse trading DA for me?
Yeah, so for Congress to pass an immigration reform bill such as big as lifting entirely of caps and entirety of refugees and family visas, Trump was going to have to ask, Trump is going to ask to fund the border wall. So if this is not going to happen, if Trump is not going to sign this bill or Congress is not going to pass this bill if Trump doesn't sign the border wall. When the border wall gets signed, I guess the impacts clearly say why that is bad. It's also assuming for the current crisis that's happening at the U.S.-Mexico border. And I guess the bigger impact of it is preventing war with China.
Okay, can you point me to where specifically in the card it says that any immigration, where's the link to my specific plan and that it will be grouped to border wall funding?
Your plan is literally removing the entirety of EB cap visas, refugees, and family visas. That is a big immigration reform. I don't have to have a specific article saying you're this kind of plan would. It's just immigration reform. If you think that you're immigration reform, then you meet into this line. If you're going to say that you're immigration reform, my card says immigration reform would not happen.
Okay. So, do I use the term immigration reform anywhere in the 1AC? Just yes or no?
No.
Okay.
Unless if you don't do that, you're not going to meet my topicality. So.
Okay. So just on your term, how is this about my framing of immigration reform? Is that what you're
using the state using the state, I guess the United States as the savior of using a state-centric system as the savior for human rights is inherently dehumanizing.
Okay, so it's the use of the United States federal government.
Your use of state-centric systems in general.
Okay, cool. Then about your link turn, like what is your link turn on the Spalding and Rice evidence on the
So currently when China sends people here, they're not just sending them because the government is allowing them to do that. And if the government is allowing to let them to go, like currently even students are stealing data information, or like whether they come here for internships or schools. So when the Chinese government has a hold of these people, has a record of these people, and they allow them to go, they're only going to allow them to, well, not only, but like they're majority going to allow them to go to come to the United States at some cost of like stealing data. So this in turn might look like it's bringing the US higher up, but in turn like they're actually stealing the information and advancing China's agenda, I guess.
Okay. I'm gonna take some prep. Okay, I stopped at 1:30 and I'm uploading the doc now. Okay, everyone should have access to the document. And I'm gonna give a roadmap. Just give me a second to get started. Okay, so the roadmap's gonna be the two T's, and then the Miller disad, and then the horse trading disad. And then it'll be solvency, AI Taiwan, and Chinese violence at the bottom. Okay, are my judges ready? Opponent ready? Cool. All right, so let's get started. First off on topicality, legal immigration refugee is not topical. 1, we meet. 2, this part of the plan can fall under immigration reform, which makes their interp irrelevant. 3, counterinterpretation. Legal immigration refers to permanent resident status. Rivera 2019. Legal immigration refers to instances where a non-citizen immigrant is in the country legally under permanent resident status. 4, we meet. All our visas are permanent resident status. 5, standards. Bright line. This is clear delineation. Temporary visas are not okay. Permanent visas are okay. B, ground. Negative gets all the same ground, but about bringing people into the U.S. C, education. Refugees are the immigration issue of our time. Excluding them means we don't really learn about the issue. D, checks all of their arguments. You can't give a pathway to citizenship for people already there. E, they misread the resolution. It never says immigration visas, just restrictions on legal immigration. 6, extra topicality is good in this case. We give links to core args, which answers all of their offense. We include a predictable element related to immigration. 7, good is good enough. We have a reasonable interpretation of the topic. Searching for a perfect interpretation detracts from an examination of issues. Instead, we have endless topicality debates. This is bad for education. Next on her second T, 1, we meet. We are a comprehensive overhaul of immigration. 2, counterinter. Immigration reform can be individual proposals. Narste et al. 2020. Those failed immigration reforms all included 3 policies. The first category includes a proposed rule change that would substantially improve the current system. These proposed reforms are just a few of the new and interesting ideas out there. Out-of-the-box thinking will prepare us for the next immigration reform debate. 3, we meet. 4, standards. 1, ground. If the affirmative had to overhaul immigration, then Neg would pick out of something and win every debate. Negative still has ground based on immigration policy change, like politics and increased immigration is bad. 2, education. It's better to have focused debates rather than to fit everything in 6 minutes. 3, their definition requires extra topicality and bidirectionality because past immigration reform included things like border security. 4, good is good enough. We have a reasonable interpretation of the topic. Searching for a perfect interpretation detracts from an examination of the issues. Instead, we have endless topicality debates. This is bad for education. Now onto the Miller disadvantage. 1, this makes no sense. Miller is a hardliner. The plan lets in a lot of immigrants. By definition, this means Trump has taken power away from Miller and weakened his stance in the administration. 2, term. Miller's super powerful now because of restrictionist policies. Blitzer 2020. Miller's obsession with restricting immigration has become the defining characteristic of the White House. Miller has choreographed these initiatives. Now on to the horse trading disadvantage. So on this, I have 2 main contentions. The first is that that Galvin and Riekman 2020 evidence has no specific, there's no specific evidence that this links to my plan and that my plan would be grouped with border wall funding. 2, and this is the most important argument, judges, this doesn't account for my plan. This doesn't account for Trump and Congress passing an immigration policy. This is about Congress stalling immigration policy now, but via my plan, Congress and Trump sign and pass a bill that is immigration policy and immigration reform. And so with that, there's going to be increased motivation to see it through and to see its implications and the impacts of that plan solved. So this DA goes away because of that. It doesn't account for my plan, and there's no specific evidence that links this disadvantage to my plan. Now on to solvency. So she says we use the USFG, and that's kind of like the internal link to why our framing of the affirmative immigration reform is problematic, but she doesn't respond to my specific evidence about how the United States is specifically situated to check China for genocide. And she tries to group solvency and the genocide advantage, which you can't do. 1, this solvency advantage just doesn't account for all of my specific evidence about how Trump, the perception and signaling that would be sent by Trump implementing an immigration policy is enough to check China for genocide and the structural violence and very real existential violence that Uyghur people are facing in the status quo there. She doesn't account for that at all. And this solvency argument regarding human rights rhetoric and dehumanizing, structural violence is happening in the status quo. If this is a structural violence impact that the turn's supposed to be, then you weigh that against the continued genocide that has gone uncontested in this round that would continue to happen if my plan is not implemented. Really quickly go to AI. There's no risk of the link turn because she says that the story of this link turn on the AI advantage is that the government is allowing them to go, but the government's not allowing them to go. China is a genocidal state. They're not just gonna let Uyghur minorities that they currently have in concentration camps just freely leave. That's not what's happening. That's not what's happening. And so there's no risk to the link term, but you can extend that China will never catch us. That's terminal defense, but that's no reason to vote us down, and we're not going for this advantage. And then on Taiwan, she undermines, like, once again, to restate, she undermines the signaling and perception that my plan gives. And the signaling and perception solves for a myriad of the arguments and answers back for a myriad of the arguments. Like, the only like context in which she views our plan is like it's material and physical effects and impacts. But we also have the signaling and perception, which is a huge way that we're able to solve back for the harms of our case and for the harms of the advantages. But you can extend her defense on the Taiwan advantage that war is that war wouldn't happen. She has an author that says that the risks are too high and that China is unlikely to attack Taiwan. You can extend that. But she has essentially not contested my Chinese violence argument, and I've solved her solvency takeout. And so I get full access to solvency and to the genocide advantage and solving for structural and existential violence in China. And that's why you vote aye.
Are you taking prep? I'm gonna run to the restroom while you take prep.
Okay. I have
Same.
45 left. So start. No. Okay. Okay, you're back. Great. Okay, the order is going to be Miller at top, and then horse trading, and then AI advantage, and then the human rights. Oh, let me upload the doc. I'm sorry, I totally forgot. There you go. Okay, is everyone ready? Cool. Start 6 minutes. All right, first on the Miller decision, we're not going for this. But the term they apply here is literally not offensive at all. They just say Miller is powerful not because of restriction policies. This does not imply in any way any offense that they're going to get, or like any non-uniqueness non-unique or no like argument they make. Miller is super powerful now. If we can concede that, it doesn't really matter here. But now let's go into the horse trading decide. First, as an overview, Trump cannot give funding for the border wall now because he has no issue to leverage. Democrats are refusing to propose or even consider progressive immigration reform legislation but the passage of the plan sets up horse trade between setting up immigration reform for refugees and AB visas, and funding for border wall by legitimate enrichment evidence has to get passed. Congressional acquaintance is leading to implementation on the walls, leading to implementations and locks and exacerbating instability throughout Mexico and Latin American unquantifiable results. You can skip the card there. So on here, first, like they can't say, the first argument is like there's no link in between this because I didn't say specifically, but they say they're immigration reform. Under their interpretation, if under their team interpretation, if they are immigration reform, my card specifically says immigration reform. If they are immigration reform, they're going to trigger this end because Trump is not going to sign their bill unless he gets the border wall. This is the link here. I don't think they did a good enough job of comprehending this. And border funding is red line for Trump. No immigration reform until he gets it. 11/18. The most plausible compromise is welfare amendments the president was open to do with protect young Americans in exchange for his land and world immigration is the wall funding. Unless it includes the world, there will be no approvals. So again, as long as there immigration reform, there will have to be a wall funding. Specifically, I don't have to prove to you that specific visa have to be and then they say they don't account for the plan. This is literally accounting for the plan. When their plan is passing, Trump will be like, okay, if I'm signing this, then let me get the border wall. So under fiat, if you're gonna say I'm gonna pass this plan, Trump is going to pass the border wall. Like this is literally accounting for their specific scenario. And you can extend my impact level on that, like that it will prevent a Cold War with China, and it is literally a key strategy to do that. Like that just links in into their frame. Into their structural framework. But we can go into that later. On the impact level, one more card. Construction of the wall is uniquely worse. Physical suffering increases and nationalism booms. Beer 17. Trump's wall. Remember the expenditure to create a symbol of illustration of nationalism. People which is crossing increasingly dangerous points since the border fence was built in death rate more than triple degree. The symbol could be a setting right principle behind the president's executive order managing the construction of the wall. Also requires a crackdown of some seekers coming to the border from Central America and administration works and instincts are harmful, wasteful, and offensive. This is a symbol will help thousands of wasting billions. So on the level impacts, first. None of their impacts they consider the Taiwan impact that war is not going to happen. On their AI impacts, the turn still stands. They literally say there's no risk of her return, but their risk here, their argument is that the Chinese we're going to let people in, but to let people in, you're not just going to grab people from China and bring them here. They have to have they have to go through the Chinese government to do this. Specifically on EB visas, they're going to have to, even just for getting refugees on EB1, EB2, EB visas, they're going to have to go through the Chinese government because they're students, because they're workers. The Chinese government allows this. You can extend my card on my app, on my NC, that's specifically talking about, that specifically says the Chinese government does not allow, the Chinese government does not allow people to go in unless they have knowledge of it. If they're going to allow them to go, they're going to ask them to spy. People on student visas are spying on American nationals now. On American secrets now. What would happen if there is uncapped amount of visas, EB1, EB2, EB3 visas, working in tech companies, big corporations, and stealing data? This term still stands. At worst, they make AI. They make the race worse. It might look like it's helping us at the face front, but the Chinese people are not actually here to help the United States because they have to go through the Chinese government. So the link there still stands. Now on to, excuse me. Now on to like their human rights. Their human rights and to decide together. First on the human right, they my term still stands. So first of all, putting a state-centric forum to solve human rights issues, as there isn't no human rights issues here, is problematic on its own. They didn't answer that directly, either by saying like human rights are abuses are happening elsewhere, or alternative causes. So the link of using state-centric systems still stands here. They did not justify their state-centric system. The only way they're going to justify it is using them through AI and stuff, which they don't even have an access to, because using them through AI will like ultimately cause the have to turn. So the links there still stand. But even if you buy this ed, the border wall ed that is going to create nationalism and going to create lasting impact, specifically on the last card I read on Beer 17, that it's going to create billions of lives and that has tripled the death of people, is still going to win. They're not going to solve for the China they're not going to solve for any of their advantages. The only advantage they have here is human rights, but only human rights, the long-lasting impacts of the wall are going to outweigh, because the wall is here forever to stay and the deaths are going to increase. The Chinese like the human rights violations there, he did not give me any number on the F when I asked, so there's literally no way of evaluating the magnitude on you. The magnitude here is on billions of people you have to wait on here.
Okay, I had 1 minute and 30 seconds. I'm going to take that now.
On speech drop, you uploaded the one in C, not the one in R.
The one in R cards are at the bottom of that document?
Oh, thank you.
There's a block for one in R.
Okay. I have no new cards or new docs, but I'll give you a roadmap. Okay. So I'm going to start with the Miller DA, and then I'm going to go horse trading, and then I'm going to go solvency. Or no, Miller, horse trading, and then AI, and then solvency and Chinese violence. Opponent ready? Judge is ready. All right, so first off on the Miller DA, she tries to like just completely write off my turn, like that Miller is super powerful now because of restrictionist policies as not mattering in this debate. But that's unique offense. You're going to float to the affirmative because we like we're not a restrictionist policy. We upturn the current restrictionist policies that are allowing him to become powerful. So this weakens Miller and completely turns this disadvantage. And that's offense flowed to the affirmative. Now, on the horse trading dissent, she says construction of the wall is uniquely worse in physical suffering and nationality booms. One, border wall funding is not an integral element of my plan. Like, I don't see how Fiat doesn't check back for this. Like, she's including something in my plan and trying to talk about this impact when that's not an impact. She doesn't account for my plan at all. Like, Trump and Congress passing the immigration policy give them a motivation to see it through as I've like described it and as it's written in my plan text. It won't be grouped with border wall funding. So yeah, and even if you want to grant her this advantage, like the impacts of the Chinese genocide advantage outweigh on probability and time frame and magnitude, and I'll demonstrate that in a second. But quickly on the AI advantage, her argument is an appeal to some sort of nature of the Chinese government, or like the way the Chinese government is now and what they'll do. That isn't true. Like there's no risk to the link turn because the Chinese government isn't currently allowing, like if there was a risk to the link turn and the impacts that she claims, why isn't the Chinese government just allowing Chinese people to leave now? I mean, they absolutely want to. They're being detained in concentration camps and like they're being murdered in China. Like there's absolutely no risk to the link turn here. And she says at worst, it makes the technological arms race worse. And that impact is outweighed by my solvency and the Chinese violence advantage. So go there now. One, she doesn't account for signaling and perception that my plan gives, which solves independently of bringing people physically to China and spurs a global impetus to constrain. So Trump demonstrating a willingness to act against China spurs a global participation and global engagement in constraining China and checking them as a genocidal state. That is enough for my solvency. And then but she doesn't respond to my specific evidence about how the USFG, which is a state-centric system, is necessary to check China as a genocidal state. And also, she never responds to another independent impact in that advantage framework, which is like the risk of pandemic and the risk of disease. So like that's two independent risks, and on the basis of time frame and probability, like genocide and structural violence is happening in China now, and we have a moral and ethical obligation to do something about it. And that's what my plan uniquely gives you in this debate. And yeah, that's why you vote out.
Good debate.
Yeah, good debate.